discussing the state of the REF as it is at the moment. It's one of the things that's been held up, postponed, pushed back a little bit by COVID, as so much of our work has been. And I'm here today to chat with Greg Walker and Sally Barnden about our experiences of REF and where it is. My name's Gail Marshall. I'm head of the School of Literature and Languages at Reading. I'm a Victorianist by trade, and I'm also a first-time member of the REF panel this time round. So, Greg, introduce yourself, please.
I'm Greg Walker from the University of Edinburgh. I work mostly on late medieval and early Tudor literature. This is my third REF, which is alarming to admit. I was a panel member in 2008, was it? And then deputy chair in 2014, and now I'm chairing for my sins the sub-panel this time round. And I was also on the Impact Pilot panel, which was a thing briefly a while ago.
And Sally?
Yeah, my name's Sally Barnden. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at King's College London. I work on an AHRC funded project called Shakespeare in the Royal Collections. And I was also one of a group of ECRs who were organising a group of events for the Shared Futures Conference, which is now postponed, but hopefully we can move forward with that in the future.
Yeah, it is absolutely face-to-face postponed till next summer. Hopefully we can do lots of exciting things then and not lose all the planning that you've done. So Sally and I have got a set of questions that we're going to ask Greg, which we hope will be of interest to lots of us, and then we'll end up having a chat about what we think the future of REF and English research might look like post-COVID. So Sally, I think you're going to kick off with some questions first.
Sure. So I think for a lot of people, the sort of most burning question at the moment is about timing. So we know that the REF has been postponed. We don't yet know when it's been postponed to. And I think some people are worried about the sort of strategies of when things are published and whether there's a possibility of things sort of falling down a gap between the current REF and the next one if they time things wrong. Yeah,
I mean, they are real concerns, and there are real concerns in a normal, if that's the right term, REF session. But for this one, they're particularly useful and pertinent and troubling, I think. So in a way, this is absolutely the wrong moment to be having this conversation, because we don't yet know exactly what the REF organisation is going to come up with in terms of timetable, although we're getting clear signs of direction of travel, as they say. We should know by the end of June. So a lot of this will become redundant stroke much clearer then. But I mean, if you seasoned REF watchers will read between the lines, and when they say they're still currently exploring the idea of submission in March, which was one of the options put forward, I think that's a fair, they don't mention any other options. So if I was shrewdly sitting on the touchlines, I might think we're looking at quite a short, I mean, they called it, what did they call it? A freezing or a pausing or something. So they're thawing it out quite quickly, like an oven-ready chicken. So I would imagine that most of the deadlines will stay where they are, and that we would be looking at a submission 3 or 4 months later than one was expecting. I think the institutions, universities are really desperate to get this out of the way for obvious reasons. So certainly Edinburgh was saying, you know, we want the earliest possible submission and to hell with the consequences. And I think that's what a lot of universities said. And so English as a sub-panel will have to pick up the consequences of that, if that is indeed what turns out to be the case. Mm-hmm. In terms of, I mean, the REF is, I'm going to term this as carefully as I can. I mean, it's a bureaucratic process, and it's run centrally for a hell of a lot of different disciplines with their own distinct cultures. But at the heart of it, there is a desire to get this right and to be fair. I mean, fair means different things in different disciplines, but it does mean that they will try and avoid chasms, cracks through which bits of work can fall. I mean, I think that there'll be enough people on that case to make sure that in one REF or another, you know, your work won't get lost somehow. Was that all you asked, or was there a third question I've now forgotten cleverly? Sorry, Sarah.
Yeah, I think that about covers it. Thank you. I guess to pick up on the idea of fairness, one of the other things that some friends asked me when I said that I was doing this was about how the REF can account for inequalities between researchers in the field. So this is kind of a two-part question, partly the sort of inequalities that are with us all the time. In my sort of sub-discipline, there's recently been a paper published about the refusal of a special issue about Shakespeare and race, and about the sort of gatekeeping that happens within publishing, that we just don't have equal access to publishing across all researchers. And I guess the other part of that is about inequalities that have been created or exacerbated by COVID. So people who have caring responsibilities may have found it much more difficult to get things to a submission stage over the last several months. So is the REF gonna, are there any systems in place to account for those inequalities?
I think that the question sort of bifurcates into two areas: inequalities that are fundamental to our careers and which, you know, affect those people in the situations you've mentioned in all aspects of their work. And we can talk about that at the end, if you like, after I've dealt with the particular COVID related ones. On that, there is a lot of work being done. People are on subcommittees desperately modeling the different kinds of inequality that might have arisen. I mean, that is one thing that REF has got, I think, steadily better at. I mean, I thought the last REF was quite good at picking up inequality and allowing for special circumstances and those kind of things. And they sort of stepped back from that process under some pressure this time round. And now they're having to step forward again and modeling all kinds of scenarios about, you know, what the field you work in, the career stage, the sort of institution, your domestic circumstances, your health situation. You know, there are people that have had COVID, there are people that are shielding because they've got vulnerable children, partners, parents. And the REF process has got to try and take account of that. And I think it will, as best I'm aware. I mean, there are a lot of people coming up with a lot of different plans and proposals to deal with that. And we'll wait and see what comes out. But what I'm hearing at the moment is a fairly shrewd understanding that there isn't just one magic solution that will, you know, there's talk of, you know, should we just move the deadline and that'll make everything all right? A bit like the thinking was, well, if we just take away the need for 4 outputs, there'll be no inequality at all, will there? And then you suddenly think, well, actually, it just moves the goal a little bit further away or a little bit closer. So I think there will be a range of mitigations, as the terminology is, that will try and take account of as much of that as possible. And if I had to put money on it, I would say one of the options is going to be just tell us what went wrong for you. You know, tell us what your challenges were in this period, and we'll try and take account of them.
I think a lot of institutions will be doing that as well, weren't they? Having equality and diversity censuses just to work out what happened. Yeah. So I guess this is something that won't necessarily apply. Well, COVID-related disturbances won't apply so much to this REF as to the next one. So it's going to be really important to keep this in focus, I guess.
Well, I think they are going to impact quite significantly on this one as well. And we've got to, you know, if you've got a book coming out this year, if you have, well, one of the obvious things is impact. You know, the whole year of impact activity is rendered vulnerable, nay, impossible in many cases.
Yeah. I was going to move on to talk about I was thinking, I suppose, about the kind of equality issues will have long-term implications, but the impact is perhaps the bit of this REF that we can most easily imagine being significantly impacted in terms of those cases, particularly about public engagement aspects to them, whether domestically or internationally, but more broadly anyway, that kind of collaborative work, the meeting up with people, it just hasn't been happening for the last few months.
And the more you look, the more things come under that category, I think. You know, there are outputs that are themselves performances. There are outputs that rely on collaboration. There are outputs that happen in real time. And if they haven't happened, will never, you know, they just won't exist. Yeah. And the process is going to have to take account of that.
So how do you think we might be able to do that?
Well, again, I think, you know, that the practical political answer is that they've got subgroups thinking about it. So I mean, there are groups of people around virtual tables trying to say, well, what about this? So there is work underway. Again, I think there won't be a single answer to that because all the different things will fall into different problematic areas. So there's got to be a range of things. There might be a shifting of deadlines for some kinds of things. You know, what if your collection of poems, your monograph, was with a 2-person press run out of a COVID hit area, or was run by someone who themselves was sick or had caring issues? your book is going to be put back. So that I think there have to be measures that say, if you got your book in, let's assess it as if it came out. You know, let's rethink what we mean by publication in those last 4 or 5 months of the process. But I'm in some ways more worried about the performances that will be lost. Because, you know, if you're playing in front of an audience and that is your output, it's very hard to find, you know, what do you work with, the score or the script, or if it's improvised and physical, what is there to assess? And I think there has to be, well, I mean, what I've argued for is that in some extreme cases, you just have to say, you give someone a pass, you give them a buy. Here's all the evidence that said the play was ready to go. It just couldn't happen because the theatre closed, the company went bust, the actors were unemployed. You know, we can't exist in some kind of Dickensian workhouse where you say, too bad, go away and submit your second best output, because that's another kind of inequality, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, is it possible that if things like performances get postponed, they could be submitted subsequently? Could we have a bit of a rolling deadline for things that have been adversely affected?
I'm sure, I mean, I think that's the kind of thing that the REF team is open to discussion about. I mean, there are certain things that, you know, I mean, we have to accept that arts and humanities are panel D for a reason. You know, the medics and the scientists, you know, they have the big guns, and so the model has to suit them first, and then we go in for mitigations and what about us and things like that. So a thing like what you can bring forward to another REF cycle is an institutional issue which will apply to all 4 panels. And so we'll need buy-in from all of them. But they're all having the same problems, I think. You know, you talk to mathematicians and scientists and medics, and they're equally worried about, you know, how their research can be captured and how it can be submitted. You know, some people are actually working on vaccines at the moment, and, you know, it might be out in November, or it might be out in January. If you're going to cure COVID and miss out on the REF, then that looks like a wrong system to me.
Yeah, indeed. I suppose quite a lot of other disciplines have been, as you say, leading research in terms of COVID and what we need people to do right now. And within English, particularly when people work in English language that I'm aware of, are doing lots of really interesting work that's been generated by COVID. And we're told that one of the reasons for delaying the REF is that so the system can take account of COVID research. Is there any way that's going to be sort of privileged, enabled? I mean, is there a way of enabling the process to take account of this really quick fire work that lots of people are doing right now?
I mean, it will depend on the output, I think. You know, how will it look when it appears in the public sphere? And I think what I would hope happens is that there's the flexibility there for someone to say, I did this, I want it recording now, even though the journal doesn't come out until February and the deadline is in December. Or I did it now, there's a version on that I'm not quite happy with, which is on the institutional repository, but the fully worked piece of work is not coming out until March. I want to hold it over to the next REF. And I think, to be fair, there has to be a flexibility to allow both of those things. Yeah. You know, people shouldn't be railroaded into a particular version of the work they've done, which they're not happy with, just because of the peculiarities of pandemic-related publications and things.
No, indeed. I think that's very reassuring.
I mean, that's what I would want. I mean, yeah. And I know the scientists want that too. So, I mean, there's a good headwind behind it.
Yeah, that's great. I think, Sally, you had some broader questions about ECRs and the REF.
Yeah, so again, like one of the questions that comes up all the time is about portability or non-portability. So this is whether as an individual you can sort of carry your research with you when you move from one institution to another, which of course lots of ECRs are doing fairly regularly, sometimes annually. There's been some sort of back and forth on this question. I know it was arranged for the current REF that both your previous institution and you as an individual would be able to submit your research, but we understand that that's changing. So there's a lot of anxiety around that and about sort of becoming worthless when you move institutions because all your publications have to be left behind. So it would be useful to hear what the current thinking is around that and around how sort of the effects on ECRs can be mitigated.
I mean, when the Metropolitan Police have got no idea who did a crime, they say it's a fast-moving and dynamic investigation, which means they haven't got any evidence at all. So I'm going to say this is quite a fast-moving and dynamic question for ref. I think if I'm being cynical, then each ref is an animal unto itself. And the things you manage to get done this time, you count as a victory, and then you fight the same battles next time. I mean, the idea, I mean, that you start with, I'm sure philosophers have got a word for this, Sally, but I mean, it's, you start with a question and you end up with an answer which is a mile away from where you want to be. The question is, should institutions be rewarded for the research that they fund? And presumably most right-thinking folk would say, yeah, fair enough, that's okay. And so you have this fear that they're going to pay for 9 years of someone's research and then they're just going to nip off to another institution for a huge paycheck the next time.
Yeah.
And institution A is going to say, oh, poor us, we invested in that bastard and now she's gone off to somewhere else and is a superstar. But then you suddenly look at that and you say, well, that's not fair. But then what about the other people who are collateral damage in that? And then the natural anxieties of early career folk who have no firm, haven't got that kind of negotiation power. Movement for them is a necessity based on, economic need and kind of career precarity. So then you look at that and then the ref team says, well, okay, we haven't quite got our heads around this yet. Let's allow them to do both this time. And so everyone breathes a sigh of relief and says, well, okay, so this time we're okay. As soon as this ref ends, there'll be the debate about whether there'll be another one. That always happens. And then there'll be the debate about what the rules are for that. And then there'll be the massive battle about whether those rules need to be changed, resisted, altered. So I think the same conversations are going to happen again. Does this apply to early career researchers? There was I better not name names, but there was a session at another conference where someone who had just drawn up a large number of rules for the next ref had said, there is no way I'm shifting any of these rules about early career researchers. This is a non-issue, it's not going to change. And then that person left the room to go to another meeting and the person from the ref said, obviously we're going to change this for early career researchers, it makes no sense. Okay. So the discussion is always dynamic. It's always about setting a clear set of rules and then realizing that they actually create injustices that you have to then negotiate. So I suspect people are very aware now of the pressures on early career researchers, largely because early career researchers have made a very good job at making that public and saying, well, you've lived on us for a very long time. This is what that means for us. What are you going to do about it? Mm-hmm. I think REF is now taking account of that as institutions are slowly beginning to think about that. So I don't know the answer, but I know that it will still be a live issue next time. And yeah. REF saying next time everything will be different is a statement of intent. It's not a statement of fact.
So do you have any sense of what the sort of just and equitable way forward might be on that question? I suppose, you can get involved with defining early career as X number of years post PhD, but that in itself sort of raises equalities issues. Lots of people have had career breaks for various reasons. There doesn't seem to me to be any sort of clear way to define early career in a way that's not going to leave some people out in the cold.
Yeah, I think, but that's true of every line you draw anywhere. There are always people, and what you then need is mitigation that says, except in cases A, B, and M3, in which case you can do something else which makes it easier for those. The REF is a kind of, it's never going to be a comfortable garment for English as a discipline to wear, but it's all about taking out the sleeves a bit and adding a bit of girth to it and then adjusting the collar so it kind of looks all right if you squint a bit. And that's the process that people like Gail and me this time around are going to be trying to mitigate the things that the rules still leave a little bit uncertain, behind the scenes, trying to get those fixes in place before the whole thing starts.
Sure.
I know this is not helpful because I've been at 3 processes like this, and the community always rightfully says, tell us the rules. What do we have to do to get a 4? Tell us the rules. And the REF subcommittees, panels always say, leave it with us. We know it's going to be difficult. Trust us to do this. And the community says, come on, we're not going to trust you. We want the rules. So there's always that kind of trade-off. But, the benevolent circle is that the people on the REF subpanel are English literature and language people. They're they're there not because they want to punish the discipline. They're there because they want the discipline to flourish, and they understand the threats and pressures it's under, and they want to find reasons to celebrate English. And so if there are ways of celebrating things, then the subpanel will celebrate them, or will resign en masse.
That sounds good. So a related thing maybe, one of the bits of popular wisdom that sometimes floats around is that there's no point anymore in doing chapters for editor collections or for Oxford handbooks, Cambridge handbooks, etc., because those things don't have the same kind of weight and prestige in REF terms as an article in a journal or a monograph. This, in our discipline, seems to have its problems because often those things are more read, especially sort of handbook pieces. They are incredibly useful to students and to other researchers. So what's the thinking at the moment about the value of different kinds of publication?
Yeah, I mean, for better or worse, English, like a number of other related disciplines, doesn't have the kind of bibliometrics, the kind of league tables that enable you to say, you know, this good, that bad, this rubbish, avoid it. So, you know, the only way around is peer review. The only way around is that everything is read more than once. And people come to a judgment on reading things. So where it's published, which journal it's in, which publisher it presses, what format it's in, doesn't preclude you getting 4-star for anything. And that has to be the bedrock of the whole process. Mm-hmm. Because the moment you say, don't write a chapter in a handbook, you know, you're saying one of the most significant things in the discipline doesn't count when you measure the discipline. And that can't be right. But that said, you know, there are ground rules you can apply from the other end. You're looking for rigor, you're looking for the other two things that we're looking for, originality and significance. Thank God for that. You know, and undeniably, you can have greater significance most of the time, but not all the time, with a bigger piece of work. You know, a monograph makes a bigger splash than a 100-word essay, unless the 100-word essay is brilliant and says, you know, everything you thought about this is wrong. So it depends on the handbook essay. It depends on the chapter in the collection. You know, one of the things about handbooks is they tend to ask you to do a set number of things. You know, set out where we are with the scholarship and then do something new with it. You know, my chapter on Wordsworth will largely say he was a kind of bloke who lived in the north west of England and wandered around writing about flowers. And then there's this poem, and I'm going to tell you about it for what's left of this essay. If you don't have much time to do that thing, then obviously the chances of you being rigorous and significant is less than if you have another 5,000 words and you say, yeah, funny bloke, read about clouds, marvelous bloke. Now I'm going to write about the thing that really interests me. Yeah. So, you know, we all know from reading a companion or a handbook that there are chapters that are brilliant and change the way you think about a whole field. And that's going to get 4-star. Mm-hmm. And there are also chapters that say, you know, Shakespeare lived for this period, wrote a lot of plays, a few poems, had a beard, went bald, died at Stratford, or wasn't. And that probably isn't going to get much beyond a 2.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think if I were advising someone who was an early career scholar, or anybody, you know, who's approached by a handbook editor to say, will you do the chapter on this? They should say, yes, could I have 8,000 words rather than 5? And will you allow me to be a bit independent and add some original research rather than just doing what most people are kind of invited to do, which is tell you about the last book they wrote. Mm-hmm. You want to write a book on someone, so who's written on that already? I'll go to them and ask them to do it again.
Yeah.
You know, that tends not to be original and may not be very rigorous. But if you say at the beginning, you know, I want this to be a research piece, and most editors are going to want that anyway, then you've got as good a chance of getting 4-star for that as you are for anything else. Sorry, that was a very long answer to that.
No, it was a good answer. And I think the sort of the other side of the coin with this kind of thing is that we need to continue to be able to think beyond REF in terms of the value of our publications as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was the other thing I was going to say about, because when you mentioned inequalities in general in academic life, there's a hell of a lot more to being an academic in English literature and language than the REF. You know, and the REF is a kind of particular animal that analyzes a particular thing, and we're all fixated with it because there's money attached. But if you only did things that were good for ref, the discipline would crumble within a 5-year period. So of course people have still got to do the things that ref doesn't value. And as departments and schools and institutions, we've got to allow that. You know, there's very little for editing a journal, for instance. But if no one edited journals, where would we be? So in our other lives, you know, we have to value and nurture all that other stuff as well. Because, you know, ref is institutions are only interested in ref for 2 years out of 8, aren't they? I mean, when they're appointing, is a ref coming? Marvelous. Now it's all, you know, can you teach online?
Yes. Yeah.
So you've got to be aware of the whole career, your whole life. It's got to be something that you want to do and sustainable, rather than, oh, what does the ref want me to do?
Yeah, for sure. Okay, I've got one more sort of policy question, I guess, which is about independent researchers. So within English departments, I gather that the individual staff can be returned for the ref if they count as independent researchers. And I know there's been some sort of work done about the wording and the criteria, but it still seems to be quite vague in some areas. So I myself am a postdoc. My department had a bit of a kerfuffle about whether or not I could be included. So it would be useful, I guess, to get a sense of where you think we're at on that question, when, as is often the case, postdocs have significant input into the shape of a research project. It seems sort of unjust not to consider them independent researchers, but I realise it becomes a bit of a grey area.
Yeah, I mean, the clarity from the ref's point of view, I think, is again predictably about money. You know, who are you being paid for, and who is being paid to do what? And if you are being paid to work on someone else's research, then they tend to think you are not an independent researcher. Whereas if you're doing something which is your own, then that research is a direct consequence of the funding that goes in, and therefore you're independent and can be included. But it is a massively imprecise science, and it took months, nay years, to come up with an indicative list of qualities that might or might not be indicative of independent research. And then someone says, well, what about Oxbridge JRFs? Or someone says, what about Wellcome Trust Fellows? And then you go back to the drawing board and think, oh God, are they not? I mean, again, the cop-out is even the ref takes account of people if they're not going in even as independent. You know, they turn up in the narrative sections, the environment sections, those kind of things. And so an institution worth its salt would still value and cherish the contribution, even if you couldn't go in as an independent person. But I think this is one that will run and run. You know, the next ref, if there is one, will be again struggling with what it means by that.
Yeah.
But in a way, we started last time with the category of, which was really retired people. It was called, I think it was category C staff, who were people who weren't paid at all by the institution, but they were including them because they worked Foucault or whatever. And so they wanted to say Foucault works for us. And so there was all kind of shenanigans that, you know, you had to audit out. You know, when did Foucault last work in Worksop? We've not seen him at Nottingham University for a while, have we? And, you know, actually we think he's dead. And it turned out, you know, that it wasn't worth it. And I think there's a bit of a backlash to that affecting those people who, again, are kind of not on full-time contracts. And it's about agitating and saying, well, you know, what about us again? And there'll be people next time around arguing that again. So again, it's a case of, you know, it's all right this time, although there are kind of be clear audit issues around this kind of thing. But we'll have to do the whole thing again next time and revisit each of those conclusions in the light of the people that were excluded this time around.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that COVID, where we are now, is going to have lasting implications for how we do ref?
Goodness. Well, I mean, it might kill it off completely. That's one possibility. But then, you know, be afraid of what you wish for, because if we're stuck with a metrical system, English will struggle, I think, to show its best light under those conditions. I think there's a danger that we're hinting that everything now can be done via Zoom, teaching, life meetings, conferences, we can all do it on Zoom, much cheaper, don't need all those pesky buildings that vice chancellors have been building up for the last 300 years. So, you know, there's a worry that COVID will have a lasting effect on everything we do in that respect. I hope not. I mean, because if REF is worth doing still, it's worth doing properly, which is about assessing everything in the round and not judging things by proxy. And, you know, if a performance is worth assessing for REF, it's worth watching, listening to, attending, those kind of things. So I think there are dangers in saying we've learned how to do this in a cheaper, more streamlined way.
Well, it might mean that we actually value the ways in which we can't do things now. So we value the liveness of live performance. We value what we kind of casually call serendipity, but actually is really part of the fundamental, you know, basis of why we do what we do, which is talking to each other, learning from each other, and that kind of happy coincidence of two people in the right place at the right time is actually really fundamental. So it would be a great pity if we didn't learn what we value as well as what we can get away with from this whole process, I think.
I mean, for me, that was perhaps one of the only, no, it was probably the major pleasure of doing the REF the last 2 times. I mean, you wouldn't do it for fun, but the chance to get to read everything or a large chunk of everything that was produced by English departments across the country, and to talk in rooms with fellow academics about stuff and say, did you see that? Did you see that article? Did you see that novel? Did you see that poem? And no, I go and look at that. And you would come away at the end of the process thinking, just English is brilliant. You know, why would anyone ever want to do any other subject other than English literature? And you really did see the truth of, you know, that maxim that REF is there to celebrate excellence, where it was just David Sweeney talking. You know, he sent the troops off, I think it was in 2008, celebrate excellence wherever you find it. You know, and it will be in Sunderland and Derby, and as well as St Andrews and Oxford. It will be everywhere, and there will be brilliant work being done in fields you didn't know existed. And the REF is there to say, look, remember that next time you try and streamline the system or concentrate your funding on the Golden Triangle. You know, this is what you would lose.
I think it's probably true of most subjects. It's certainly true of English, isn't it? Everywhere you go, there is something fantastic being done. And it relies on the whole network of colleagues in that place, not just the one person whose output you're looking at. But
it, by and large, doesn't need an enormous machine.
No,
that costs £1 million.
Absolutely.
So you can have it anywhere where there are brilliant scholars working.
Indeed, indeed. Well, it makes me look forward to the REF more than I was before.
Maybe overselling it slightly.
Okay, well, time will tell. But that celebratory aspect is really lovely to think about. But I suppose on the more practical side, and I am now talking about those of us who are going to be assessors, I think we're all working overtime at the moment. We're doing all the usual work that we have to do at this time of year and into the summer, plus the kind of COVID-ness of the things we have to do. And I'm slightly worried that by the time we get to March, there's going to be quite a big burnout in terms of the kinds of things that REF assessors will have been doing all year, not having much of a summer holiday this year, not having much of one to look forward to next year if you're going to be reading REF. And I just wonder whether you think there might be a case to be made to having more assessors. Partly because I know that the time is going to be, we're not going to get any more time to do this because of the funding question at the end of it that needs to be determined. So is there a possibility that REF will appoint more people to read?
I think if the timing is, as we're tentatively inferring from the cryptic signals coming out of REF Central, that wants an early submission and a quick assessment following from that, then I think there has to be a real discussion about both the robustness, to use that awful word, and accuracy of the process, but also of the well-being of the people doing it. I mean, I've been saying this in every opportunity until they've muted my microphone, that this is going to be, by and large, the worst year of almost everybody's academic life ahead. You know, you've had the trauma of pandemic, the change to online teaching, hybrid teaching, whatever it is, you know, all those kind of stresses. You're going to have a year of implementing that. And if you then have to come straight off of, or in some case during assessment and teaching, to start working on the REF, then there is a real risk of burnout. And in unequally imposed pressures on folk who are close to snapping point anyway. So, I mean, I'll certainly be arguing for as many mitigations as possible. I mean, my brilliant first pitch was that we should postpone the whole thing by a year, which was about as persuasive as a cold rice pudding in a gale, but that didn't go too well. But I mean, I think we have to keep going back and, you know, arguing for, if this is going to happen, it's got to happen properly.
For sure.
So I think, you know, more assessors might be one way around it. I mean, I can't imagine us meeting for 3 days on Zoom. Can you? I mean, that would be.
I nearly said something I shouldn't publicly then, but
Yeah.
no, it's very exhausting. It's lovely to chat with you, but it is very exhausting having meetings of more than an hour on Zoom, really.
Well, it's a thing, isn't it? There is a science on Zoom fatigue, which tells you why it is fatiguing. And so you can't just transfer, you know, what would have been a social interactive occasion in real time onto Zoom or Teams or whatever platform and expect it to be the same process.
No, definitely not. I suppose in a way that it does lead us to think about what the future of REF might be. And as you say, you know, perhaps we shouldn't wish for that, because bibliometrically it would be very difficult. But I guess a system that wants to try to, as you say, celebrate not only the work we do, but celebrate the care that goes into assessing that work as well. Because I think that's one of the most impressive things about REF, is that the seriousness with which people take this process and the care that they put into it. And it's care, I think, for not just for the individual researchers and the pieces of what they're looking at, but actually care for the discipline and how it works across, as you said, literature, languages, creative writing as well, and the ways in which we can actually articulate that as a really strong kind of triumvirate of things that really complement each other in teaching context as well as in research context. So there is something worth preserving and celebrating, and perhaps the REF is part of the process by which we do that. And maybe that is something that we need to keep on doing, and maybe that's something that, I don't know, Sally, as our early career representative here, maybe that's something you've got a slightly different take on, because you're younger, frankly, you've got, you know, more of your career to look to, and I don't know how optimistic you feel about the ways in which that kind of celebration will be carried on.
I guess it's really encouraging to sort of put a face to REF assessors in this conversation and think about the care and the celebration aspects of it, because I suppose the character of it as a thing that comes down from on high, from the government, and a thing that's driven by and that drives funding, makes it easy to see it as a sort of unsympathetic and impersonal, and like the dictator that rules all of our lives and makes our lives more difficult. So it's really encouraging to sort of see the flip side of that and think about sort of care and enthusiasm and celebration. I don't know if I can. I suppose the thing that's always difficult about it is that the rules of the REF seem historically to have made institutions behave badly. And the risk is also always that changes in the rules will allow institutions to find new ways to behave badly by making people redundant or by snapping up Foucault at the last moment. So I suppose that's always the risk, and that's the thing, that when you're someone who's on a short-term contract or who's moving a lot between institutions, you feel very much that you're in the grip of those forces that you don't have a lot of control over.
Oh, that's my dog barking. I think, this is again a cop-out, but it is one that I firmly believe in. I think a lot of the problems with REF are actually problems with universities. You know, the things that academics find burdensome are the mock refs, the constant pressure, the modeling of your performance, the performance management, all these euphemisms for telling you what to do. You know, don't be doing that. Or where's the grant application? Where's your impact case study? Could you develop it, please? You know, they're not things that the REF says, but they're kind of inevitable consequences of that. You know, if UKRI said universities would gain £1 million for every used car lot they put up on their campuses, we'd all be selling used cars by next Thursday, wouldn't we? I mean, it's whatever the system for allocating funding, universities will try to do the best they possibly can out of that, because it's in the nature of that kind of institution. But you know, I would say this, wouldn't I? The sub-panel, and actually the main panel as well, the academics at the middle of the assessment process are actually always thinking of their colleagues and saying, well, you know, this rule will actually put this kind of people at a disadvantage. Can we change it? And then, you know, they don't want to give 1s and 2s and 3s. They want to give everything a 4, and they're looking for reasons to give everything a 4. So it's a kind of, you know, there is in the eye of the kind of bureaucratic storm, the sub-panel is trying to make it work for the discipline and, you know, for the people involved in the discipline, because they're your colleagues. You can't, you know, I couldn't go back to Edinburgh and say, right, you know, we've killed off Glasgow finally. We will rule the world. You know, it's about, I mean, if we can look kind of generally ahead, you know, the arts and humanities is going to have a tough time the next 5 years. And one of the most obvious ways that it can signal its own usefulness is by doing really well in the ref and saying, you know, it's not just STEM that performs excellently in research and has a global reputation. It's arts and humanities too. Mm-hmm. Actually, if you look at things like the global research reputation rankings, actually it's art and humanities first and science and medicine next. You know, the best performances in global recognition are for English language and literature, history, art, performing arts, those kind of things. It's not big tech. So, you know, English has got to fight over the next 5 or 6 years to show why it's excellent. You know, not why it should survive, why it should be excellent. And that way, those smaller, precarious departments in institutions that are facing financial crisis won't look to close English. You know, they'll look to find ways of growing those departments in the arts and humanities and letting them cross-subsidize, which is what happens in other places. Mm-hmm. But it's going to be tough. So the ref is one of those battlegrounds, I think.
It is. I think it's really useful. It's also one of those places where colleagues from different universities work together. And I think as individuals, we want to collaborate. So I'm working, well, not working, advising on a project that Sally's working on. And it's a tremendous kind of bringing together of expertise. We've all had that experience. And we all know how important that is in our day-to-day lives, how we feel about ourselves as researchers. But it's that kind of thing which at institutional level might get a bit lost in the competitions. I suppose REF is also helpful in that it celebrates not only our work, but also how we work too. And it's a really important model for that. So it's another reason for not wanting to lose it. But also I think going forward, things like Shared Futures, which was a great coming together of people 3 years ago, and hopefully will be again next year, become even more important because it's there where we can actually speak about ourselves as the whole subject discipline together, rather than in these tiny Renaissance, early modern, 20th century Victorian ways. And actually it's a way to remember how we all work together best, I think. But just thinking about what you were saying, Greg, about science and how that's valued, I mean, we're all up against that kind of STEM narrative, even when, as you say, the evidence for that narrative is perhaps lacking. Nonetheless, it's something we have to keep fighting against. And I'm wondering whether, partly due to COVID, but partly due to where we are socially, whether that more functionalist way of applying the kind of research that people are doing is something that we might have to be aware of and perhaps you know, articulate. And I don't think it's something that necessarily excludes any aspect of English at all, but it just might mean that we possibly have to articulate why we do what we do and how we do it in slightly different ways over the next few years if we are to counter that kind of STEM narrative or come up fighting against that.
Yep, I think that's right. And we'll have powerful allies in the British Academy and the AHRC and the REF process to make those cases. But you know, they're going to have to be made and made as vigorously as we possibly can, because, you know, not to put it too finely, you know, people's jobs and future jobs and careers will rest on it.
Yeah, well, I think that's what you. Yeah. Sorry. No, I just think they do now, because we're all aware of practically every university in the country is having anxiety about what is going to happen next year, and jobs are looking very fragile. But what we really don't want to do is to lose that kind of commitment to arts and humanities that is currently still in place in most universities across the UK.
And it's ironic that the REF is seen as being divisive and about ranking and judging, but actually the process of assessing it, you come out with a sense of the discipline as important, and of its dimensions, how it's shifted since the last ref. It's always
Yeah.
fascinating to see, where the new fields of work are. And, I have always come out of it thinking, this isn't about who comes first. It's about celebrating English as a field of activity. And if I'm honest, getting English to come out first.
Well, perhaps we need to make sure as assessors, as a panel, that we kind of really advertise that, perhaps even more than in the past, actually. It's kind of exciting. Great. Well, we've been talking for a while now about REF and other things too. It's been really enjoyable to see both of you. So thank you very much indeed for participating in this part of English Shared Futures Online. And thank you for joining us, our audience. And yeah, there are lots of other things going on this weekend, so I hope you'll tune into some of those other things too. But in the meantime, thank you very much, Greg, and thanks, Sally. Nice to see you both.
Thank you.
Sally. Thanks, Gail. Have a good rest of the conference.
Thank you.